On the bustling streets of Chicago, a young man found himself struggling in a way he never imagined. Desperation had set in, and his stomach growled louder than ever, reminding him of the many nights spent without food. Little did he know, a single encounter with a figure he only dreamed of meeting would change his life forever. This wasn't just a moment of charity. It was the beginning of a new life. A second chance. Chapter 1. A simple request. The day had begun like so many others. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the city of Chicago. On the surface, everything appeared normal. People rushed about their business, unaware of the stories unfolding in the shadows of the bustling streets. But for one man, today felt like it might be the last of many struggles. Dave sat on the corner of a busy street, his tired eyes tracing the movements of pedestrians. He was a man who had lost more than just his home. He had lost his sense of worth, his dignity, and, at times, his hope. The past few years had been unforgiving, and each day felt like a battle he was losing more and more. His clothes were worn and stained with the remnants of his struggles. His shoes, once sturdy and reliable, now bore the marks of countless miles walked on the unforgiving streets of the city. The tangled hair and rough stubble on his face were just the outward signs of the emotional exhaustion that gripped him. There was no mistaking it. He had become invisible, not just to the people passing by, but to himself, too. It was as if, with every step, he had slowly faded into the background of life, relegated to a place of forgotten faces and unheard voices. His cardboard sign, which read simply, "Hungry, anything helps," was more of a plea for acknowledgement than a request for charity. It was a silent cry for connection in a world that had learned how to ignore him. Most people did just that. They walked by, their eyes darting away as if they couldn't afford to see the truth sitting in front of them. Some even crossed to the other side of the street, unwilling to spare a moment to look him in the eye. There were times when Dave wondered if he had become a part of the scenery, like the benches or the streetlights, just another fixture in the city, overlooked and passed by. His stomach growled loudly, the hunger pangs almost deafening. It had been days since he had last eaten something substantial, but there was nothing he could do. The few coins in front of him, some dropped by hurried strangers too busy to care, were not enough to buy a meal. Maybe, just maybe, he would have enough for a small snack or a cheap slice of pizza from a nearby vendor. But even that seemed like a distant dream now. As Dave gathered the courage to pack up his meager belongings and retreat to the park, where he could at least get some rest, a thought crossed his mind. How did it come to this? How did I end up here? His mind wandered back to a time when he had a job, a home, and a sense of stability. Life hadn't always been this way. He used to be someone, a man with plans, with ambitions. But somewhere along the way, the rug had been pulled out from under him. One bad decision, one setback, and then another, until everything he had worked for was gone, leaving him with nothing but the cold, harsh reality of his situation. But even in this darkest hour, there was still a spark inside him, a faint flicker of hope that refused to be completely snuffed out. It was that small part of him that pushed him to stay, to keep asking for help, to keep trying. Maybe, just maybe, today would be different. And just as he was about to give up for the day, something happened. A shadow fell over him, blocking the fading sunlight from his face. Startled, Dave looked up, and for the briefest of moments, time seemed to stop. Standing in front of him was a man, tall and commanding, dressed in a simple black hoodie and basketball shorts. He was a figure who seemed almost too out of place for the streets of Chicago. His posture strong and confident, as if he didn't belong in the world that Dave had come to know so well. "Hey, man," the stranger said, his voice deep and calm, carrying a kindness that Dave hadn't heard in a long time. "How's it going?" Dave blinked, caught off guard. No one ever spoke to him like that. People either ignored him or hurried past, pretending not to see. But this man? He was different. His eyes, hidden behind sunglasses, radiated a quiet strength, a sense of comfort that Dave could almost feel in his bones. Dave cleared his throat, still unsure of what was happening. "Could be better," he said softly, his voice rough from lack of use. "Just trying to get enough for a meal." The man nodded, glancing at Dave's sign and the few coins in front of him. There was no pity in his gaze, no judgment, just an understanding that made Dave feel, for the first time in a long while, seen. Without saying another word, the stranger reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet. Dave braced himself, anticipating the usual gesture, maybe $1 or $2, a small kindness that would help him buy something, anything. But instead, the stranger's words left him speechless. "How about I do more than that?" the man said, his tone casual but sincere. "Let's get you sorted out today." Dave's mouth fell open in shock. "You serious?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Dead serious," the stranger replied, offering his hand to help Dave to his feet. "Let's start with some food. You like barbecue?" For a moment, Dave didn't know how to respond. His stomach growled louder, as if to remind him of how long it had been since he had tasted anything real. But this was beyond his wildest hopes. A stranger offering him more than just a meal. A chance. "Yeah," Dave said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love barbecue." Chapter 2. An Unexpected Encounter. The city was alive, but for Dave the world had become a blur of fleeting faces, passing cars, and the distant hum of a life that felt just beyond his reach. It had been years since he felt like he mattered to anyone. People had learned how to ignore him, how to pass by without giving him a second glance. He had become part of the background, like a shadow in the corners of the world, never truly seen. Yet in his heart there was always a lingering hope, a belief that somewhere, somehow, things could change. As Dave sat on the corner, staring at his worn cardboard sign, he braced himself for another long, fruitless day. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the street. The noise of the city seemed to fade into the background as his mind wandered, his thoughts drifting like the autumn leaves that danced in the breeze. His stomach growled, and for the 100th time that day he wondered if it would ever end. Then something broke through the monotony, a shadow falling over him, blocking the light. Dave blinked, startled, and looked up. What he saw was unexpected, yet oddly familiar. A tall figure, dressed in a simple black hoodie and basketball shorts, stood before him. The man's face was partially hidden by sunglasses and a baseball cap, but there was an undeniable presence about him. Dave couldn't help but feel a strange sense of recognition, though he couldn't place where it was coming from. For a moment he just stared, unsure of how to react. No one ever approached him like this. Most people avoided him, ignored him, or hurried on their way. Yet here was a man standing in front of him, offering him something more than just a glance or a polite refusal. This was different. The stranger crouched down, bringing himself to Dave's eye level, and in a deep, warm voice he asked, "Hey, man, how's it going?" Dave blinked, caught off guard. No one had asked him that in a long time, and certainly not with the same genuine kindness this stranger was offering. People were always too busy to even make eye contact, let alone stop and ask how he was doing. The question lingered in the air, almost too real, too personal for Dave to process at first. For a moment, Dave couldn't speak. His throat tightened, emotions welling up, but he finally managed to respond in a low, gravelly voice. "Could be better. Just trying to get enough for a meal." The man's gaze softened. He didn't pity Dave, didn't make him feel like he was some kind of charity case. Instead, there was understanding, a quiet empathy that resonated in the stranger's eyes. Dave wasn't just another person to pass by. He was someone worthy of being seen, someone worthy of being helped. The man glanced at the cardboard sign that sat on the ground in front of Dave. He didn't flinch. He didn't avert his eyes as most people did. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet. Dave braced himself, his mind already preparing for the usual, maybe $1 or $2 if he was lucky. It was always the same routine, a small offering, a passing kindness, and then the feeling of being invisible once again. But this time, something felt different. The stranger didn't stop at a few coins. The man's words, though simple, carried a weight that Dave wasn't prepared for. "How about I do more than that?" the stranger said, his voice calm and steady, but there was a quiet authority in it. "Let's get you sorted out today." For a moment, Dave froze. What did he mean? More than that? The words felt foreign to him, almost surreal. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. It wasn't just about giving him a handout. It was about something deeper. It was an offer of change, of something beyond just a meal. It was a glimpse of hope, of the possibility of a life that could be different, that could be better. "Are you serious?" Dave asked, his voice wavering slightly, unsure if he was dreaming. His heart raced, and his mind scrambled to understand what was happening. Was this real? Was this some kind of joke? The stranger nodded, the kindness in his eyes never wavering. "Dead serious," he said, standing up and extending his hand to help Dave to his feet. The gesture was not one of pity, but of respect. "I see you. I see your struggle, and I'm here to help you rise above it." As Dave hesitated, looking down at the few coins in his hand, his stomach growled louder than ever before, demanding attention. The hunger inside him was not just for food, it was the hunger for connection, for kindness, for the recognition that he mattered. Was this really happening? The stranger smiled, that warm, reassuring smile that seemed to promise everything would be all right. "Let's start with food," he said, his voice friendly and casual, but his words carried more weight than he could have possibly understood. "You like barbecue?" Dave's heart skipped a beat. Barbecue, the very thought of it made his mouth water, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he realized how much he longed for something more than just survival. He longed for comfort. He longed for nourishment, not just of the body, but of the soul. His voice trembled as he answered, "Yeah, I love barbecue." The stranger grinned, his face lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "That's what I like to hear," he said, motioning for Dave to stand. "Come on, let's go." As they began to walk, Dave couldn't help but notice the looks they were getting from passers-by. People turned their heads, their eyes widening as they recognized the stranger beside him. The whispers, the phones being pulled out to snap pictures. It all felt overwhelming. Dave's anxiety started to rise, and he felt the familiar urge to shrink away from the attention, to blend back into the shadows where he was safe from the world's gaze. "Where are they looking at us?" Dave asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger chuckled softly, pulling his sunglasses down just a little, revealing a twinkle of recognition in his eyes. "They probably recognize me," he said with a shrug, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. It was then that it clicked. The man walking beside him wasn't just any stranger. This was Michael Jordan, one of the most famous athletes in the world, standing in front of him like an old friend, offering him more than just money. Michael was offering him dignity. He was offering him a chance to reclaim something he had lost long ago. "Wait," Dave said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're Michael Jordan?" Michael smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in that familiar way. "Guilty," he said, with a playful grin. Dave stood there for a moment, speechless. His mind raced, trying to process the reality of the situation. He had never imagined anything like this. A homeless man, sitting on the street, and now walking side by side with one of the most iconic figures in sports history. It was almost too much to believe. But Michael wasn't treating him like a spectacle. He wasn't looking down on him, he wasn't offering a handout to ease his conscience. He was treating him like a person, with kindness, with respect, and with an understanding that transcended the ordinary. He saw Dave, not for his circumstances, but for who he was, a human being, deserving of love, of care, and of a second chance. And that was the moment when everything changed for Dave. That was the moment when he realized that kindness could shine through even in the darkest of times, and that the world was still full of people who cared. Chapter 3. The Meal That Changed Everything. The restaurant was quiet, with the faint hum of conversations blending in the background as Dave followed Michael Jordan through the door. As the warm, smoky scent of barbecue hit him, Dave's senses were awakened in a way that felt almost surreal. It had been so long since he had sat down for a proper meal that he could barely remember the last time he had tasted something that wasn't hastily thrown together or given out of pity. But this was different. As they walked in, Dave felt his stomach tighten, not just from hunger but from the overwhelming sense of discomfort that always came with being somewhere so out of place. The restaurant was sleek, the kind of place that seemed reserved for those who had it all, the polished business types, the well-dressed celebrities, the people who had never known the feeling of not knowing where their next meal would come from. And then there was him, dirty, disheveled, a man who had spent too long on the streets, feeling invisible, feeling like nothing more than a shadow in a world that passed him by without a second thought. The cashier at the counter glanced up and froze. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she recognized Michael Jordan. "Oh my gosh, are you—" she stammered, her voice shaking slightly. Michael gave her a warm smile and waved her off with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime in the public eye. Yeah, it's me," he said with a shrug. "But don't make a big deal out of it. We're just here for some food." Dave stood awkwardly behind him, his heart racing. He felt like an intruder in a world that didn't belong to him, and the stares of the people around them only added to the discomfort. He wasn't used to being noticed, much less in such a public, obvious way. But Michael was unfazed. He walked to the counter, completely at ease, like he had done this 1,000 times before. As Michael motioned for him to order, Dave stood there, unsure. The menu board in front of him seemed to swirl before his eyes. Pulled pork, ribs, brisket. The choices felt almost overwhelming, and he was hesitant to take up too much of Michael's time. The last time he had been in a place like this, he had been on the other side of the counter, serving food to those who could afford it, trying his best to blend in with the crowd. But now, here he was, standing at the counter, unsure how to act, unsure if he was allowed to pick what he truly wanted. Michael leaned in slightly, noticing Dave's hesitation. "Take your time," he said gently. "Order what sounds good to you, no rush." The kindness in Michael's voice, the way he seemed completely comfortable in this moment, put Dave at ease in a way he didn't expect. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just the homeless man on the street, the invisible face begging for scraps. He was Dave, an individual with desires, with dignity, and with a right to choose. With newfound confidence, Dave finally spoke. "I'll have the pulled pork sandwich," he said, his voice still quiet but firm. "And mac and cheese." "And sweet tea." Michael nodded approvingly, his grin widening. "Solid choice. That mac and cheese here is probably fire." Then, without skipping a beat, Michael turned to the cashier and added, "I'll take the rib platter. Extra sauce. And throw in a couple of cornbread muffins, too. Can't have barbecue without cornbread." The cashier, still recovering from her initial shock, quickly rang up the order, but her hands were trembling as she processed the payment. Michael, with his usual grace, handed her a crisp $100 bill, pushing it across the counter with a wink. "Keep the change," he said casually. The cashier stammered her thanks, and Dave couldn't help but notice how the room felt different now. There was an energy in the air, something intangible but powerful. Michael wasn't just a celebrity here, he was a man, extending genuine kindness, making Dave feel like a person deserving of the same simple joys everyone else took for granted. The exchange was effortless, and yet, for Dave, it was profound. As they sat down at a window-side table, Dave could feel the warmth of the meal in front of him, but it was more than just the food that made his heart feel full. It was the way Michael treated him, not with charity, not with sympathy, but with a kindness that respected his humanity. He wasn't just buying him a meal, he was offering Dave something far more important, the feeling of being seen, of being valued, of being worthy. Dave picked up his sandwich, his hands shaking slightly, not just from hunger but from the overwhelming emotion of the moment. He took a bite, and the taste hit him like a wave. The pulled pork was tender and smoky, the sauce just the right amount of tangy and sweet. He closed his eyes as he chewed, savoring every bite. It was better than anything he had eaten in months, maybe even years. "This is amazing," Dave muttered, almost in disbelief. Michael laughed, the deep, rich sound of it carrying through the air like music. "Told you, man, barbecue never disappoints." For a few moments, they ate in comfortable silence, the world outside fading away. It was just the two of them, Dave finally able to eat something filling and delicious, and Michael offering quiet companionship and a sense of normalcy that Dave had long forgotten. The meal wasn't just about the food, it was about the way it made Dave feel human again. He wasn't just a man asking for a handout, he was a man who deserved to sit at a table, to enjoy good food, to be treated with respect. When the meal was finished, Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes watching Dave with an expression of genuine interest. "So, what's your story, man?" he asked, his tone soft, inviting. Dave hesitated. For so long, his life had been reduced to survival. He had been so caught up in the struggle to get by, so focused on the next meal, the next corner to sleep on, that he had forgotten how to open up, how to share his story with anyone. But there was something about Michael, the warmth in his eyes, the way he didn't rush, the way he truly cared, that made it feel safe to talk. "I lost my job," Dave began, his voice quiet. "Got evicted. It just kept snowballing, you know? One thing after another, and I don't know, I just kept falling deeper. I've been on the streets for a while now, just trying to get back on my feet." Michael listened intently, nodding along, never interrupting, just letting Dave speak. And for the first time in a long time, Dave didn't feel ashamed of his story. He didn't feel like an outcast or an invisible figure. He felt heard. He felt like he mattered. As they finished their meal, Michael looked at Dave with a kind smile and said, "You've been through a lot, man, but you're not alone. And things, they can get better." Dave's throat tightened. He hadn't heard words like that in so long. The weight of them, simple yet powerful, was enough to break through the walls Dave had built around himself. And in that moment, as he looked across the table at Michael, he realized that this meal, this simple act of kindness, had changed everything. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the belief that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a future he had nearly given up on. Michael had shown him that. Chapter 4. A New Beginning. As they sat together, the hum of the restaurant fading into the background, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had just happened. The meal wasn't just about filling his stomach. It was about something much deeper. For the first time in a long time, he felt like a person again. Not just a homeless man sitting on the street begging for scraps, but a man worthy of kindness, of respect, and of a future. Dave picked at the last few bites of his pulled pork sandwich, savoring the flavors and the warmth that spread through him. But as he chewed, a thought lingered in his mind. What now? The meal, the clothes, the kindness? It was all so overwhelming, so generous. But Dave knew, deep down, that a single meal couldn't change everything. It wasn't just the hunger in his belly that needed to be filled. It was the hunger in his soul, the emptiness that came from years of feeling invisible, of feeling like life had passed him by. He glanced at Michael, sitting across from him, the man who had shown him more kindness in a few hours than most people had in a lifetime. Michael wasn't just buying him food. He was offering him something Dave hadn't thought possible. A new beginning. "Thanks, man," Dave said softly, his voice thick with emotion. He wasn't just thanking Michael for the meal. He was thanking him for something much deeper, something that had been missing for so long. Hope. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes warm and steady. "You don't have to thank me, Dave," he said with a smile. "I'm just glad I could help." But Dave wasn't sure how to explain what he was feeling. The simple act of being treated like a human being again, with kindness and dignity, had changed something in him. It was as if a door had opened, a possibility for a future that felt more real, more attainable than it ever had before. But that future, it felt so far out of reach. How could he, a man who had lost everything, possibly rebuild? "You're not alone in this, man," Michael said, as if reading his thoughts. "I've been where you are. It's not easy, but it's possible. You just need the right help, the right support. And I'm here for that." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of experience. Michael didn't just see a man who needed a meal. He saw a person who had fallen, but who still had the potential to rise. He wasn't offering a quick fix or a momentary gesture. He was offering a path forward, a chance for Dave to get back on his feet. "I've been hungry before," Michael continued, his voice low but filled with understanding. "I know what it feels like to be at rock bottom, to feel like there's no way out. But trust me, Dave, it doesn't have to stay that way." Dave swallowed hard, his throat tight. It wasn't just the food or the new clothes or the spa treatment that had begun to restore something in him. It was this feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. There was a way out of this endless cycle of poverty, homelessness, and desperation. Michael had shown him that, even when the world seemed like it had turned its back on him. There were people who cared, people who were willing to help. "Let's get you cleaned up," Michael said, standing up and offering Dave a hand. "You've taken the first step by accepting help, and that's the hardest part, but now, let's keep going. There's more to life than just surviving, Dave. You deserve to live." For a moment, Dave hesitated. The idea of change, of actually trying to rebuild, was both exciting and terrifying. He had spent so long just surviving that the thought of thriving, of moving forward, felt almost foreign. Could he really do it? Could he really escape the life he had been trapped in for so long? But then he looked at Michael, standing in front of him, his hand extended with quiet confidence, and something stirred inside him. It was a flicker of belief, a glimmer of the possibility that life didn't have to stay the way it had been. "Okay," Dave said, his voice steady but uncertain. "Let's do it." Michael smiled, a smile that was both encouraging and knowing. "That's what I like to hear." As they walked out of the restaurant, Michael's presence beside him was like a steady anchor in a world that had always felt too chaotic, too unpredictable. For the first time in a long time, Dave didn't feel like he was alone. He felt seen, understood, and, more importantly, he felt like he mattered. But Michael wasn't finished yet. This wasn't just about offering a meal or a kind gesture. This was about giving Dave a real chance to start over, to reclaim the life he had lost. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, Michael turned to him with a serious expression. "Dave," Michael said, his tone more earnest than before, "I'm going to help you get back on your feet. But this is just the beginning. You need more than just a meal, more than just new clothes. You need to take care of yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally. You need to remember who you are and what you're capable of." Dave nodded, taking in the gravity of Michael's words. He had always been so focused on surviving, on getting through each day, that he had forgotten what it felt like to take care of himself. He had forgotten the power of self-worth, of self-respect. But now, standing beside Michael, he was starting to understand. "Let's get you cleaned up," Michael said again, this time with a nod toward the spa down the street. "A fresh start isn't just about what's on the outside. It's about what's on the inside, too. And that means taking care of yourself, inside and out." As they made their way to the spa, Dave's thoughts swirled. For the first time, he felt like he was stepping into a new chapter. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But he wasn't walking this road alone anymore. He had someone by his side, a man who understood, who had been where he was, and who was willing to help him rebuild his life. And with each step he took, Dave felt a little lighter, a little more hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something beautiful. A new beginning. Chapter 5. A New Look, a New Life. The walk to the spa felt surreal. With every step, Dave's mind raced, his thoughts swirling in a mixture of excitement, uncertainty, and disbelief. A few hours ago, he had been sitting on the street, barely able to scrape together enough for a meal, and now, here he was, walking beside Michael Jordan, one of the greatest athletes of all time, toward a spa that looked like something out of a movie. Dave's hands were still trembling, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming realization of just how much his life had changed in such a short time. How had he gone from begging for spare change to walking into a luxurious spa with Michael Jordan, a man who had seen the kind of hardship Dave could only imagine? The whole situation felt like a dream that he feared would shatter if he opened his eyes too wide. But Michael was steady, unfazed by the stares of the people passing by. The legendary basketball player had done more than offer him food or a temporary handout. He was offering Dave something deeper, an opportunity to reclaim his dignity, to start over, to believe that a future full of possibility was still within reach. As they arrived at the spa, the building loomed before them, sleek and modern with large glass windows and a polished sign that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon sun. It was the kind of place that catered to the wealthy, the successful, the people who never had to worry about where their next meal would come from. Dave felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't sure he belonged here. He wasn't sure he deserved to be in a place like this. He glanced at Michael, his nerves creeping up again. "Are you sure about this?" Dave asked quietly, the doubt creeping into his voice. "I don't know if a place like this would even want someone like me in there." Michael turned to him, his face serious but kind, his eyes soft with understanding. "Don't ever say that," Michael said, his voice low and firm, but gentle. "Everybody deserves to feel good about themselves. You're not someone like me or someone like them. You're just you, and that's enough." Dave's breath caught in his chest as Michael's words sank in. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him like he mattered, like he was worth more than the clothes on his back, more than the dirt and grime that had become his armor against the world. Michael's words weren't just comforting, they were empowering. They were a reminder that his past didn't have to define his future, that he wasn't just the sum of his failures and struggles. He was a person who deserved respect, who deserved to be cared for, and who deserved to feel good about himself. Dave nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling on him. He still felt out of place, but there was something different now. Something inside him was beginning to shift. Maybe, just maybe, he could leave the shame behind. Maybe he could learn to take care of himself again. As they walked through the glass doors of the spa, the receptionist's professional smile faltered as she saw Michael Jordan standing there, and then softened when she turned her gaze to Dave. There was no judgment in her eyes, no hesitation, just a quiet understanding, as though she saw something in him that he hadn't allowed himself to see in years. "Welcome," she said warmly, her voice calm and inviting. "How can we help you today?" Michael's smile never wavered as he spoke. "I've got my buddy Dave here," he said, his tone casual, but there was an unmistakable tenderness in the way he spoke. "He needs the works. Haircut, shave, shower, the full treatment. Get him looking fresh." Dave felt a jolt of discomfort wash over him. The spa, with its sleek furnishings and polished staff, felt like a world he didn't belong to. But Michael, standing beside him, was like a bridge between these two worlds. The world he had known, where everything felt just out of reach, and the world that now seemed so foreign and unattainable. "It's going to be all right," Michael said, giving him a reassuring pat on the back. "You deserve this." Dave didn't know what to say. His throat tightened with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. He had spent so long in survival mode that he had forgotten what it felt like to feel truly cared for. But now, here he was, being treated like someone who mattered, being treated like he was worth something. A stylist led Dave to the back of the spa, and as she began to work on his hair, Dave felt the tension in his shoulders begin to loosen. She worked gently, trimming away the matted tangles from his hair, the years of neglect falling away with each snip. The feeling of the cool scissors against his scalp was strangely comforting, like the first step in washing away not just the dirt, but the emotional grime that had built up over the years. Next came the shave. The razor glided over his face with care, removing the layers of roughness, revealing the face of a man who had long since stopped looking at himself in the mirror. Dave hadn't realized just how much he had stopped caring about his appearance until now. As the razor removed the years of neglect, he began to feel a sense of lightness, a sense of renewal, as if the man he had been before all the hardships had started to re-emerge. Finally, the stylist handed him a towel and gestured toward the showers. Dave stood frozen for a moment. The thought of stepping into a hot shower, feeling the warmth of the water wash over him, felt almost too good to be true. He had become so accustomed to making do with what little he had that he had forgotten the simple pleasure of a warm shower. As the hot water cascaded over him, Dave closed his eyes, letting the warmth melt away the exhaustion that had accumulated over the years. The dirt, the grime, the pain, it all seemed to slip away in the steam. For the first time in a long time, he felt human again. He felt worthy of something more than just surviving. When he stepped out of the shower, dressed in the fresh clothes Michael had arranged for him, he couldn't help but look at himself in the mirror. The man staring back at him was different. The lines on his face seemed softer. The weariness in his eyes had been replaced with something else, a glimmer of hope, a flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, he could have a fresh start. When Dave reappeared in the lobby, Michael was sitting comfortably in a chair, scrolling through his phone. When he looked up and saw Dave, his face lit up with pride. "Look at you, man," Michael said, his voice full of admiration. "Hollywood's going to be calling any day now." Dave chuckled, still feeling the lingering disbelief of the moment. "I don't know about Hollywood," he said, but he couldn't help but smile. For the first time in ages, he felt good about himself. Inside and out. Michael clapped him on the shoulder. "That's what I like to see," he said. "Now that you're feeling good, let's keep this train rolling. You've got time for a little shopping?" Dave blinked, a rush of emotions flooding his chest. This wasn't just about the food, the clothes, or the shower. This was about the opportunity to be something more than he had been. This was about believing that he had value, that he was worth taking care of, and that he could start over. "Yeah," Dave said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Let's do it." Chapter 6. Shopping for a Fresh Start. The mall was busy as they stepped through the entrance, the sound of chatter and the rustle of shopping bags filling the air. Dave, who had spent years avoiding the stores, the crowds, the world that felt so distant from his reality, found himself standing in a world that felt both overwhelming and exhilarating. The polished floors, the designer windows, the bright lights. It was all so foreign to him. It was the kind of place where people walked with confidence, heads held high, buying what they wanted without a second thought. He, on the other hand, had always been on the other side of the equation, just trying to get by, wearing whatever clothes he could scrounge together, never allowing himself the luxury of self-care or indulgence. And yet, here he was, with Michael Jordan by his side, walking through this bustling mall like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, Dave felt like he was wearing a mask. His old self, the one who had lived on the streets, was still trying to catch up with the man who was walking beside him now. He still felt out of place, unsure of how to fit into this world, but Michael's steady presence gave him the courage to step forward. Michael, as always, was unfazed. He walked with ease, his steps confident and purposeful, and he didn't seem to notice the stares or the whispers. People knew who he was, there was no mistaking that. But he didn't act like he was the center of attention. He acted like someone who had learned that true greatness was about how you treated others, not about how much attention you garnered. As they made their way toward a clothing store, Michael turned to Dave with a grin. "All right, man," he said, his voice light but serious. "Pick out whatever you need. It's time for a fresh start." Dave froze for a moment, the gravity of Michael's words sinking in. Pick out whatever you need? He hadn't had the luxury of making decisions like that in so long. The idea of walking into a store, choosing clothes that weren't just second-hand or whatever was the cheapest, felt almost like a dream. But the reality was right in front of him. Michael Jordan wasn't just offering him a shopping spree, he was offering him a chance to reclaim something important, a chance to rebuild his identity, to choose for himself, to show the world that he wasn't just a victim of circumstance, but a man who could stand tall. Dave hesitated, the weight of the moment making him almost uncomfortable. The idea of shopping for himself, of picking clothes that reflected who he was, seemed almost foreign, but Michael's calm demeanor, the way he spoke with such genuine care and confidence, pushed Dave forward. "You got this, man," Michael said with a wink. "Pick what feels right." It was as though Michael wasn't just helping him pick clothes. He was helping Dave reclaim his dignity, his sense of self. And with each step through the store, as Dave picked out shirts, jeans, and shoes, it felt like he was also picking out the pieces of the man he had lost. The man who had once been confident, driven, and capable of achieving things. The man who had dreams, hopes, and the belief that life could be better than just scraping by. For the first time in years, Dave felt like he had options. He felt like he could choose, like he had the power to shape his future. The clothes he picked out weren't just items to wear. They were symbols of the person he could be again, a man with purpose, with pride, and with the strength to move forward. As Dave went to the counter to pay, he felt the familiar knot of discomfort in his stomach. This wasn't just a purchase. This wasn't just about material things. This was about a shift in his mindset, a shift in his belief in himself. Michael was showing him that he deserved to walk through life with confidence, with pride, and with the belief that he could be someone who mattered. Michael stood beside him as they checked out, a quiet reassurance in his presence. When the cashier rang up the total and handed Michael the bill, he didn't flinch. He paid without hesitation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Keep the change," Michael said with a smile, as he always did. Dave stood there looking at the clothes in his bag, trying to make sense of it all. It wasn't just the shopping spree or the clothes. It was the way Michael had changed his outlook on life. He had shown him that he didn't have to settle for the life he had been living. He didn't have to accept the idea that he was less than anyone else. He had value, he had worth, and he deserved a chance to thrive, not just survive. "Come on, man," Michael said, his voice breaking through Dave's thoughts. "We've got one more stop to make. You ready?" Dave nodded slowly, the lump in his throat making it hard to speak. The sense of gratitude he felt for Michael was overwhelming, but more than that, there was a sense of transformation that had started to take root inside him. This wasn't just about the new clothes or the food or the spa treatment. This was about the change that was happening inside. About realizing that he could be the man he had once dreamed of being, the man he had thought was lost forever. As they left the store and made their way to the next destination, Dave felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of possibility. It wasn't just about the material things. It was about the power of choice, the power of feeling like he had control over his own future again. And for the first time in a long time, Dave didn't feel like he was just a man who had fallen. He felt like a man who could rise again. Chapter 7. Paying It Forward. The day had felt like a whirlwind. From the moment Dave had met Michael Jordan on the streets of Chicago to the moment they parted ways, everything had changed. The clothes on his back weren't just new. They were a symbol of his rebirth. The meal wasn't just food. It was a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. And the kindness Michael had shown him wasn't just a fleeting gesture. It was a profound turning point in his life. Dave's emotions were still raw. He had spent so long living in the shadows, feeling like an invisible man, that the idea of being seen, really seen, felt almost overwhelming. Michael had given him more than just a chance to eat or a chance to dress like everyone else. He had given him a second chance at life itself. He had reminded Dave that no matter where he was or what he had gone through, he still mattered. He was still worth something. But as they walked toward the final stop of the day, a sense of gratitude began to well up inside Dave, stronger than he had ever felt before. How could he ever repay Michael for all that he had done for him? How could he possibly show the same generosity, the same kindness that Michael had shown him? The thought of it overwhelmed him, but deep down, he knew one thing. He couldn't let this be the end of it. The kindness he had received was too powerful, too life-changing to let it fade. Michael turned to him as they walked, his usual easy grin on his face, but there was something in his eyes, something deeper, that caught Dave's attention. "You good?" Michael asked, his voice soft but steady. Dave nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling in. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. You've done more for me than anyone ever has. You've changed my life, Michael. I can't even put it into words." Michael's smile softened and he clapped Dave on the back, a reassuring touch. "You don't have to thank me, Dave. I'm just glad I could help." Dave's throat tightened as he thought about the incredible journey he had just experienced, the meal, the clothes, the spa, and the way Michael had treated him not as a homeless man, but as someone worthy of dignity, someone deserving of kindness. It was all so surreal, yet so real at the same time. Michael wasn't doing this for praise. He wasn't doing it for attention. He was doing it because, as he had told Dave earlier, everyone deserves a little help sometime. But there was one more piece of the puzzle that Michael hadn't yet shared with Dave, one more lesson that Michael wanted to impart. The importance of passing on that same kindness, of helping others when you have the power to do so. "Look, man," Michael said, his voice gentle but filled with purpose, "I did this because I can. I've been blessed in my life, and when I have the opportunity to help someone else, I'm going to do it. But I'm not the only one who can make a difference, Dave. You can too." Dave looked at Michael, trying to process what he was saying. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael smiled and placed a hand on Dave's shoulder. "I know you've been through a lot, and I know it's not going to be easy. But when you're back on your feet, I want you to do the same thing for someone else. Help them the way I helped you. Show them that kindness can change everything." Dave's chest tightened as the enormity of what Michael was saying sank in. Pay it forward. It was a simple phrase, but it carried so much weight. Michael wasn't just giving Dave a second chance at life. He was giving him a responsibility, a calling, really. He was asking Dave to take the kindness he had received and turn it into something greater, to make sure that the world wasn't just a place where people received help, but also a place where people gave help. It was humbling and it was inspiring. Dave had always thought of himself as a victim, someone who had been dealt a bad hand, someone who had lost his way. But Michael was showing him that he wasn't just a recipient of kindness. He was someone who could create change, someone who could pass on the lessons he had learned. "I will," Dave said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise." Michael nodded, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Good," he said. "I believe in you." The walk back to the shelter was quieter than before, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came after a moment of realization, after understanding that something had shifted inside of you. Dave's thoughts swirled with the promise he had just made. He wasn't sure when or how it would happen, but he knew that, in time, he would find a way to pay it forward. He would find someone who needed help, someone who had been overlooked or forgotten, and he would show them that kindness still existed, that there was still hope, that there was always a chance for change. That night, as Dave settled into the shelter, a new sense of purpose began to grow inside him. The clothes he had received, the meal he had eaten, the shower he had taken, they were all symbols of something far more important than their material value. They were symbols of transformation, of hope, of the realization that he was more than the sum of his past mistakes and failures. He was a man who could start over, a man who could make a difference. And in that quiet moment as he lay in his bed, Dave whispered a promise to himself. "I will help someone else. I will pay this forward." If you've been inspired by Dave's incredible journey and the kindness that changed his life, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment of kindness that transformed your outlook? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join our community of people who believe in the power of kindness and second chances. We have so many more powerful stories to share, and we want you to be part of this journey. Together, let's spread positivity and make the world a little brighter. Thanks for watching, and remember, everyone deserves a little help sometimes. Subscribe and comment below to be part of something bigger.